I would love to officially welcome all of you to the Cosmic Connection. The title of today's show is New Moon, New Cycles. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with the Merlin, Rick Levine.
And for those of you who don't know me, I'm just here for the ride.
Exactly. And that's actually one of the places where I wanted to start. Before we dive into our topic, Rick, I wanted to first thank all of you because I just tuned into YouTube the other day and saw like a treasure trove of comments from all of you. And I just was blown away. Thank you so much for sharing how this show is touching you, how you're enjoying it, how you're appreciating it, the new perception that you have, all of it. We love hearing from you. So thank you so much for doing that. And then second, I wanted to thank you, Rick, because I was just reflecting on how amazing it is that you've literally volunteered your time and your energy to us here at Astrology Hub. And I'm just so grateful. There's so many times where I feel like we're like sitting at the feet of like Socrates or Hippocrates. And I know you would never want to say that, but it feels like just having this opportunity to hear great wisdom and great truth shared from a truly brilliant human being. So thank you for this generous and gracious contribution of your time and your energy.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And as much as I love being able to share my perspectives, it's all gracious. I obviously get something out of this also. Not only do I get to connect with many, many other people, but of course, anyone who wants to send me money can.
Send you what? You cut out
money.
for a sec. Money.
Anyone who wants, yeah, no. I am like public radio, a listener supported channel, and I do have a Patreon site that people can actually support my other video ventures. I don't want to spend time talking about that here, but it's there. Go check it out. It's patreon.com, Rick Levine, if you're so interested. But it's just a total pleasure to be here and to share with you. And I must say that I've been learning from these little meetings that we've been having. When we were talking about electromagnetic radiation a few weeks ago, you mentioned the fact that the flower in your hair was important for helping to dispel the electromagnetic radiation. So I have here. It's the best I can do. It's not gonna stay, but this is my attempt to show that I actually do pay attention.
You do pay attention. Oh my gosh, that is the best. Thank you so much. And you need to learn a trick of the trade. The orchid, when you get orchids, they have those little clippies that come on the orchid. You need one of those to help your flowers stay.
You say that like everyone gets orchids. You live in orchid world in Hawaii.
True.
Here we get dandelions. Anyhow, they smell amazing.
Oh my gosh, Rick, that is classic, amazing. I hope someone got a picture. Now, the other thing I wanted to thank you for is this, before we go into new moon, new cycles, is this exploration that we're all having around, or that you're inviting us to have around what if, and all of this Gemini energy and the ability to sit in what if someone else's perspective has merit? What if what they're saying is actually true? Can I try that on? How would I feel? How would my perception change if I were to believe that were true? And I just want to share that this has opened up a lot for me personally. I don't know how many of you have been playing with it as well, but what I see is the opportunity for genuine connection to happen between people when we approach them with more of an open mind and with more of a genuine, playful curiosity about, well, why do you think that way? I would love to understand. Genuinely, I would love to understand why you think that way.
Yeah. Not that I'm always good at this, but it's been said that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we talk.
Yes. Well, we would love to listen now to what you have to say about today. We have a new moon today and conjunctions and new cycles in general. So can we start there?
Yeah, and I do have some desktop clips to get to later if we so desire. If we want to drill down on the new moon, technically, the new moon has already occurred. It occurred about 6 hours ago from when we are recording here right now. I had to count on my fingers. It's like, it's um, um, but I think it's really important to understand. I know a lot of us do a variety of rituals around lunations, around new moons in particular, but new moons and full moons, new moons being the beginning of the lunar cycle and the full moon being the halfway point in the lunar cycle. We'll come back to that concept in just a moment. But I also know that sometimes a new moon occurs at 4 in the morning where you are or where someone is on the planet, or while you're in the midst of an important meeting that you can't cancel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And is the sound quality okay? Because my good microphone is on the other side of the office with my laptop that I've now abandoned.
It's definitely way better because we can understand you.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that's the most important thing.
And I'll deal with that for next time. So this is a bit of sage to clear the air, to ward off any evil lingering energies or spirits, and I'm holding a piece of smoky quartz here in my hand that also are good clearing energies. And I think it was Gail who suggested the sage. And when it comes to ritual, Gail knows what she's talking about.
She told us a little about what she's been doing. Tammy is asking a question before we dive in.
Sure.
Just to reorient everybody, and especially for those of you who just tuned in, we are here together for the Cosmic Connection. And the title of this week's talk is New Moon, New Cycles. And Tammy says, do you have to do the new moon ritual at the exact time of the new moon?
That's exactly where we were going to start.
I know, exactly. Or anytime within 24 hours.
So before we were interrupted by technical strangeness, I was just mentioning the fact that because astrological events happen on cosmic time, not on Earth time, when something occurs like the new moon that for me here near Seattle, Washington was at 10:38 a.m. this morning, for someone in Dubai, that would have been at 10:38 p.m. tonight. And for someone in Australia, it would have been in the wee hours of tomorrow morning. But the moment is the same, but this illusion of difference of time because of time zones becomes very significant. But here's the thing, and that is that there are many astrologers and ritualists who will perform a ritual at the exact right moment. These are people with an extraordinary amount of Virgo in their chart. Of course, Virgo being the sign of exactitude or critical degree or critical perfection, if you will. The universe appears to be rather forgiving when it comes to adapting to cycles and rhythms. In other words, there's a thing in nature that is also a basic piece of electronic circuit analysis fundamentals called rhythm entrainment. And rhythm entrainment works like this. Imagine that you were this Dutch clockmaker back about 400 years ago, a guy named Christopher Huygens. And imagine that you were making these clocks. And of course, in that particular day and age, one of the hot new technologies was this thing called the pendulum. which we don't think a whole lot about, but it altered the way people understood time. Because if you go back 500 or 600 or 700 years ago, an hour was simply 1/12 of day or 1/12 of night, which means that in the wintertime, daytime hours were very short in the Northern Hemisphere. And in the and nighttime hours seemed to be forever long. And it was the invention of the pendulum clock which altered our understanding of what an hour is, to make an hour a metronomic, exacting, mechanical measure of time that always is the same length, no matter how much you squeeze into it. And so this guy, Christopher Huygens, who was this clockmaker, noticed that when he was at his workshop and he would, before he left in the evening to go home, he would make sure all the clocks were wound, and he would start all the pendulums going, just to make sure that they were, so that he could make sure they were working before he were to sell them. And when he came back in the morning, and this isn't just a one-time thing, this is something he noticed again and again and again, enough to comment on it. And what he noticed is, and he came back in the morning, all the pendulums were somehow going like this together. At night, when he left, they were, helter-skelter, just as he started one and started another, and they were going in different directions. And by the morning time, they had all basically locked into each other's rhythms. Now, we see the same phenomenon. Actually, I don't see it here in Seattle, but because there are no fireflies here. But where I grew up, in the Northeast near New England, in upstate New York, in the summertime, every field was filled with fireflies. And the magical thing about fireflies is that as it begins to get dark, you begin to see a firefly in an open field go blink. And then you see another one, blink. And then as it gets darker, there's more, and they're going blink, 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 blink. And by the time it's really dark, the entire field is going blink, blink, and they're all synchronized with one another. It's the same thing that if you put a bunch of women who are on their menstrual cycle, you put them together, and typically, and this happens in college dormitories or in communal living situations, menstrual cycles will sync. And the rule here is this: it takes very little energy to drive a resonant circuit. It takes very little energy to drive a circuit that is resonant. And what do I mean by resonant? Well, we have to go back to my guy Pythagoras, the guy who gave us a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and he gave us the musical scales. He was a mathematician and a practicing, living philosopher and student of the cosmos, of the order and the beauty. And Pythagoras said some very interesting things, including everything is vibration. Now, this was several thousand years before we discovered that even particles of light traveled like waves and they were vibratory, and it was only when we looked at an atom did it appear solid. Does it appear solid when we don't look at it? It's just vibrating. And Pythagoras said everything is vibration. And then elsewhere, he says this very interesting thing, and it's this: all vibrations arise in sympathy. What does that mean? It means that everything is resonant to everything else, that the cosmos is this complex mixture. What's the word I'm looking for? Cacophony would come into mind if it was just sound, but it's this complete mixture of all vibrations at all levels all at once, except it takes very little energy to drive a resonant circuit, which means that when something is vibrating at a frequency close to something else, they lock. They become one. So it's not uncommon for a menstrual cycle to lock to the phase of the moon. Obviously, not everyone's does that, but in fact, the fact that it's called a moon cycle is, a key concept in the fact that there is a biological lock to a larger cycle. If you're playing a musical instrument, the closer you get to another note, let's say you're tuning, let's say you got two instruments that are tuning, and if they're real close but not exact, man, you can feel it, because it's like something's out of whack, and the closer they get, the worse they are out of whack until they exactly entrain, until they're exact. When we're listening to a radio, what we're really doing is we're tuning the frequency of our receiver. And when it matches the frequency of a wave that's already around us and coming in, boom, there's a lock. And it takes very little energy to drive a resonant frequency or a resonant circuit. And that's why a radio station can come in magnified on a radio, because of that same concept. And so this idea of resonance is really important. It's like maybe it's because I'm in Aries with Mars in Aries, but I assume that everyone who's ever had a grand piano has yelled into it, ah, and listened to the whole piano vibrate for like seconds afterwards, even though you're not doing anything. You've never touched it. The same thing is true with a guitar. If there's loud music on, your guitar will actually the strings will be vibrating because of this resonance. Now, what the hell does this have to do with the new moon? Everything, because the moon's cycle around the Earth is a regular cycle that happens, like, I'm going to use an interesting word here, clockwork, because that's what it is. It's part of the cosmic clock. And the way we can tell where, you see, circles or cycles, and the words can be interchangeable, they're the same meaning. They're the same meaning. A circle is just a cycle that's turned back onto itself. So we think of cycles like this, like a sine curve. But if you take this part of the cycle and then the down part and you shift it, it becomes like, and that's, so a circle is really just a cycle. And the problem with measuring circles or cycles is they're continuous. They have no beginning and no middle and no end. And so we arbitrarily pick points to mark the beginning of a cycle. And now we're talking about a new moon. And in fact, we're talking about any conjunction. Why? Because a new moon is simply a conjunction between the two largest markers on the cosmic clock. Because once, and obviously the Earth spinning around once a day is another marker, but when we look at the things up there, the moon is the fastest moving thing up there. We astrologers refer to the moon as a planet because the Greeks called anything that moved in the sky or wandered planets. The word planeta means things that wander, wanderers. The planets are wanderers. So when people say, oh, what do you think that, the astronomers now tell us Pluto isn't a planet? I go, I don't give a shit, The sun and the moon aren't planets to astronomers either, but we astrologers refer to anything that wanders in the sky, in the true Greek meaning of the word, as a planet or a planeta. So when we watch the moon moving around the Earth, there are two ways in which we can track its movement. And these two ways, interestingly enough, are not, they are similar cycles, but they start at different times. And let me just explain what the two are and why one of them is, for our purposes, more important. First of all, we can look at the night sky, and when the moon is visible at night, and of course it isn't always visible at night because the moon is detached from the spinning of the Earth cycle, which means that the moon can be visible during the day, but we may not notice it because the sky is so light. All the stars are visible during the day, except our sense of sight isn't sharp enough to discriminate the overwhelming light of the sun from the stars that are still out there. So if we were to map where the moon is lined up with what appears to be fixed stars up there, That's one way of mapping the moon cycle. And of course, we astrologers are interested in the signs of the zodiac, which are the constellations that appear around the ecliptic, which is the plane that is made by the Earth going around the sun. And all of the planets move roughly in that same plane, except they cut above it and below it sometimes. But there's this plane that we call the ecliptic. And the zodiac is simply a division by 12 around the ecliptic, because that's how we can track the movement, the cyclical or cyclical, is that a word? Movement
Circular?
of the, that's the word. Circular. So we can track the movement of the moon by mapping it against the fixed stars. That's one way of doing it. And there is an exact timing to that sequence. However, the other way in which we map the movement of the moon, where we establish its beginning and ending points of a cycle, if we were mapping it against the stars, we might say when it goes into Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, that's the beginning of the new cycle. And then when it leaves Pisces and moves into Aries again, it's completed one complete circle or cycle. The other way of doing it, though, is by watching the phases of the moon, which are a description of the relationship between two different frequencies, two different vibratory cycles, two different circuits, if you will. One is the circuit of the Earth going around the sun. We see the sun out there. And the other, the moon going around the Earth. And in fact, our basic piece of timekeeping in our calendar is a month. You know, one month roughly is April, May, June, July. Those are moon cycles. Now, it's not exact because nature entrains on rhythms that are not exact, but it jumps to what's close. And so we can map the lunar cycle by beginning the cycle. Instead of beginning it every time it moves from Pisces to Aries and saying that's the start, we can say that the start of a lunar cycle is every time the moon lines up with the sun. Boom! It's like a fixed point. Except it's a fixed point in time, not in space. And I'll be very clear about that in just a moment, because the moon, my right hand, the moon, it's between me and the sun. Maybe I should hold, we have a quartz crystal. This is the sun. And I'm here on Earth, and my hand is the moon going around the Earth. So when the moon, from my point of view, lines up with the sun, it's exactly lined up with the sun for me, but for you now, you can see them both. Now you can't, because you're in a line with it. So when the moon lines up with the sun, that is a new moon. And because the cycle of the moon around the Earth isn't exactly on the ecliptic, it cuts above and below the ecliptic. Normally, a new moon will not look like this. It'll look like this or like this. But the fact is that the moon reaches that point of where the sun is in line, and the moon is often above or below the sun, but that's the new moon. Now, the moon continues around the Earth, and in that time, the sun is moving. So the moon gets back to where it was at the time of the last new moon, and then it has to go a little bit further, approximately 30 degrees, because in 1 month, the sun has moved 1 sign, or 1/12 of the zodiac, which is why we have a new moon in Aries. And then a month later, we have a new moon in Taurus, and then a month later, because the sun is moving on its own cycle. Are you with me here?
Yes.
Okay, so a new moon is simply the most obvious and regular and frequent planetary conjunction. Every pair of planets goes through its cycle marked against another planet. And just to bring this to a here and now, if we were to look at the planet Saturn, which takes roughly 30 years, 29 and a half years to make that same journey around the Earth or around the Zodiac, and we were compare that to the cycle of Pluto, which takes 243 years to go around once, we can say 250 is close enough. So now we have Pluto going around once every 250 years, and Saturn, like almost like the moon, coming between us and Pluto once every approximately 35 years. That's what happened in January of this year. So it was like a new moon, except it was actually a new Saturn lined up with Pluto, whereas the new moon is a new moon lined up with the sun. So every conjunction in astrology is the beginning of a planetary cycle based upon the pair of planets that we happen to be looking at. A new moon cycle, or let's say a cycle, becomes even more potent when there's more than just two planets involved, because right now we've actually not just had Saturn lining up with Pluto, but we've had Saturn lining up with Pluto and Jupiter in the mix and Mercury in the mix, and the sun was in the mix, and even the south node of the moon. And so we've had this really super conjunction, if you will, of a whole bunch of planets lining up, which is part of the astrological underpinning to this crazy place that we seem to be here on planet Earth these days. So let's come back to where I started and the question that we had, which is exactly where I was when we started, which is we had to go through that to get to this point. And that is, although the new moon occurred at 10:38 a.m. for me here in Redmond, Washington, and whatever time it occurred for you, depending on your time zones, the new moon occurred at that moment. But that moment was the beginning or seed of a cycle. Think of yourself as a surfer. And when that wave begins to form, if I'm in the right spot, I can pick up on that wave just as it's beginning to develop a crest, because until then it's just a swell, and if I tried to pick it up too soon, that swell will go under me and there's no way I can catch the wave. So the new moon might be the moment at which that crest begins to develop a curl to it, and if I can catch the wave then, man, it's just easier to catch it. However, if it's a well-formed wave, I can catch it 10 or 15 seconds later if I happen to be, inland by several hundred feet. I don't have to catch the wave at the moment it forms, as long as I can catch the wave. So I know long-time astrological ritualists, or astro-magicians, if you might want to say, who do ritual, but they will not do a ritual on a new moon until the day after, because they say that the energy is too new and too unformed, and you waste energy trying to catch it that early in the cycle. It's better for the wave to have form. Now, I'm not selling this point of view, but people I know and respect have this perception of having done enough rituals to know that even if you're doing a ritual at the moment of the new moon, it's also important what you're doing an hour later and 3 hours later and maybe even a day later. Because again, rituals are ways in which we invite the metaphysical, the spiritual, the spirits, the guides, the gods and goddesses into this dimension. They may be there and hanging out all the time, but unless there's a path inward for them, and unfortunately, a mistake that people make is that they think that just saying the right words, saying the right prayers, voicing the right intentions is enough. And I remember my friend Caroline Casey once saying, using language to incant the gods is not enough. They don't speak English. And then she would say, they don't even speak Spanish. the point is that whether you're using English or a sacred language, like a Sanskrit or Hebrew, or so many of the tribal tongues that are more vibratory, these are things that can help. But even when we speak, we're creating vibration. And you know, people forget how bad language is when it hits the translation mill. You know, that the opening lines of Genesis go something like, you know, in the beginning there was the word, you know, and it was good. Except the word word is a translation of the Aramaic, which was translated into Greek and then into Latin and then into English. And the original word was, in the beginning there was logos. And you often see that word in Christian canon and in Christian work, logos, as meant to be the word of God, you know, as the truth, the word of God. But the fact of the matter is, in Greek, again, we come back to the cosmos, meaning both order and beauty. Logos meant both voice and giving vibration to that which has not yet arisen, that by virtue of giving it voice, then is manifest in the three-dimensional world. Woo! That's why we use intention. That's why we use voice. But the voice isn't enough. The voice is an inroad, but we then have to use ritual. And ritual can be simply by doing that which you want to imagine. You know, it's a way of priming the pump. It may be a ritual of smelling a flower on a Venus retrograde and just really coming back into a sensory realm that we're often too busy or we pass by. But the question was, do you need to do a new moon ritual at the moment of the new moon? And the answer is no. You need to do ritual always. And it's one of the reasons I love Bali, by the way. In Bali, unlike other places I've been in travel, many people live their entire life in ritual and celebration. And celebration is simply ritual with others. I mean, it has to be a group kind of situation. And so we've had this new moon that occurred about 6.5, 7 hours ago, and we are still in it. And even though the event occurred in the past, it's occurring in this moment. It is with us now. And for those who watch this video on Saturday or Sunday, or even next week, there's a wonderful Jim Croce song, Time in a Bottle. Well, I like to think that all astrology can in fact be time in a bottle. And especially by doing these kinds of recordings, what we're doing is we're capturing the vibration of this moment and we're putting it in a bottle. And you can open this up on the full moon and still do a new moon ritual that's going to have validity. Now, some astrologers will disagree with me here, and that's fine. I'm okay with that, whether or not they're okay with what I just said. But it seems to me that the universe is about resonance. And when we get close to a resonant frequency, the universe wants to cooperate by vibrating with us. And by pulling our resonance into its resonance, we now then move into another level.
Wow. Okay. Amazing stuff there. Now, so one thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of when to do the ritual. And one of the things that's been really cool for us in the inner circle is we've been doing this lunar cycle after lunar cycle for years now. Some people have been doing it for years with us.
And of course, as I know, I was part of that for a month,
Exactly.
And yes, it's a fantastic, wonderful thing that simply, it's like a tuning fork. It's like,
right.
It's like hitting the tuning fork again, hitting it again, and it's always a different experience, but there's a similarity of note.
Exactly. And one of the things that's really fun to track is the intention setting process and actually tracking, do these things come to fruition? Do these things actually happen in my life? I had an intention to find a new home. Did that actually happen? And one of the questions I asked today in our in our ceremony was, how many, if you set 8 intentions, how many of the 8 came to fruition? If you set 4, how many of the 4? And it was amazing to see how many people said all 3 of 3, or 6 of 6, or 4 of 6. And so what you're talking about with resonance is also true with the way that our intentions work, don't you think? Because we're putting out a
Yes.
vibration or a field, and then the thoughts, the experiences, the actions that we need to do in order to bring that intention into physical form begin to form around our intention.
The Greeks basically said there were 3 different types of fate. Now, their stuff on fate is much deeper and wider, and I'm not talking about the mythology of the fates here. I'm talking about there are 3 different manifestations of fate. There's what's called hemarmene, a Greek word, not a word we use, but hemarmene is basically the fate we can't change. We're born in a body, it goes through its aging. We can alter that by going through aging gracefully or less gracefully, or by dying early or whatever. But basically, there's a fate to simply being to having animated this hunk of meat. So hemarmene is if I pick something up and drop it, it'll land on the ground. If it's fragile, it'll break. That's basically fate I cannot change. It's just the way things are. The second type of fate is called agnoia. And the root words in this are very knowable to people who know much about language. But there's a thing called gnosis. The Gnostics, they had knowledge. The word gnosis means to know. And ag is like without. And so agnoia is without knowing. And so a good example of the fate of agnoia would be if I'm in a car driving fast and I'm blindfolded and heading toward a cliff. And I drive off the cliff and die. That was my fate. But it was my fate because I did not know. It was agnoia, different than hemarmene. And then the third type of fate is called pronoia, which incidentally is the title of a book by Rob Brezhny, who fully gets this and understands this. And pronoia is basically the fate of knowing, but knowing in advance. And it's not the same as prediction. It's kind of what we call co-creation. And here's the way intention works. If you want to be a real magician or wizard, you can't intend things and make spells for things that are just not going to happen. It's a waste of energy. You have to pick your intentions carefully. So for me to make the intention that I want to be a child film star, and then to do rituals around it and to whatever is basically just an act of foolishness. I mean, it's an act of frustration, and it will only bring disappointment. So part of making successful intentions is making intentions that you actually have the ability to create patterns that can manifest. And so when you make 3 intentions that come true, so why do they come true? Well, they come true not because you made the intentions, but because you've been doing things either along the way or during the intention setting or after the intention setting that have enabled the words that you gave to what your intentions were. This is the logos. This is the word. There was nothing first, and then there was the word, and then this whole thing happened. And so often the key to giving language to things is to making it visible. And once something is visible, and this goes back to conversations we've had or will have on Pluto, Pluto gains its power by not being visible. Once Pluto is made visible, then we get to work with it. And once we manifest it, it's not nearly as scary or overwhelming as it was when it was hidden. The same is true with our intentions. So back to this new moon and intention setting thing is that I worked late last night and I was very concentrated on the new moon. But I ended up going to sleep at about 5 a.m. my time, and then got up at about 11 a.m. my time, which means that I was in deep dream state, hopefully, during the new moon, which was at 10:38, just before I woke up. However, when I woke up, the first thing I thought was, it's a new moon day. How am I going to spend my day? What am I going to do? What do I need to do to get out of the way? And how am I going to open up to this energy? And so the fact that as an astrologer, I spent some time last week talking about the new moon for my mid-month May overview, for my video overview. And then yesterday, I spent some time making some slides, which I'd like to share here in a few minutes, for my Instagram to help people understand the nature of this new moon. But the important thing to understand is that even though this new moon has already occurred, we can still focus on this energy and we can still plant the seed. You know, the person who plants the seed for their tomato plants on the optimum day at the beginning of spring, when the soil is no longer frozen, that's a concept you don't have in Hawaii, when the soil is no longer frozen and the sun is beginning to warm, the person who plants that seed first theoretically should grow the largest and sweetest and most fruitful tomatoes. But that's not the case. The person who plants a month late and yet nurtures those plants and gives them the nutrients, and the word nutrient and nurture are similarly rooted, that the person who uses their Cancerian nurturing lunar caretaking energy can nurture something that was even planted at the wrong time in the cycle and still bring it to fruition, the word fruition being also etymologically, referencing the fruit of something that grows from nurturing and from the nutrients. So no, I don't worry about timing events exactly, maybe to a fault. And there may be people who would say that even making an effort, again, is a way of acknowledging Mother Nature. And I think that is true. But I hope that answered that question.
Tammy, did that answer your question?
Yeah, Tammy.
Well, and I think the part that you just shared at the end about nurturing and nourishing, the intention, no matter when it's set, is probably the most important ingredient. So we do our best with the timing, but then actually tending to that intention would trump the exact timing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Intention tending. I like it.
Yes, intention tending. Yes. Okay. So I'd love for you to show your slides. Do you want to do that next?
Sure. And with a little luck, and one of the strange things about Zoom is that when you share your screen, you don't get to see what other people see. You get to see what you think they see. So can you see my screen?
Yes. And we can see a wheel with Gemini New Moon in it.
All right. So this Gemini New Moon, again, for those of you who have followed my other videos, you know that I always use an Aries rising wheel, the rising sign. That's the sign on the eastern horizon of the chart. And on a chart, the east is to the left, exactly backwards of a road map, because when you're using a road map, you're looking down. And when you're looking at an astrology wheel, you're technically looking up. And so the east and west are reversed. The east is where the sun rises. And in fact, the highest point in the chart, called the midheaven, which is where the sun would be at high noon in the northern hemisphere, is in the south. So the directions in the chart are exactly opposite, where south is straight up and north is straight down. But what I use is an Aries rising wheel instead of showing the exact sign that's on the ascendant or rising where I am, because the new moon occurred at 10:38 a.m. Pacific time, but that was at 1:38 p.m. In New York City, and 5:38 in the evening in London, and in the middle of the night in the Mideast. And so their ascendant on all those charts, depending on where you are on the planet, would be different. And one of the crazy things about life in the digital internet social media age is that the word here and there and now have all lost their old meanings, because here is basically here on earth. It's not here where I am or here where you are, because we are in a here together. Long-winded explanation, but these charts will all show Aries rising, because no matter where you are on the earth and no matter what time your clock says, the fact of the matter is that the moon at 2 degrees Gemini and 5 minutes lined up with the sun at 2 degrees Gemini and 5 minutes at the same time for everyone. And the thing to understand here is that Gemini is an air sign. Air has to do with thinking. Air has to do with logic. Air has to do with the movement between two ideas. Bucky Fuller once said that a thought is the shortest distance between 2 points. And so this whole idea of air signs is that air is in fact is about thinking. But in astrology, every elemental sign appears in 3 modes: cardinal, which means initiating; fixed, which means holding the position; and mutable, meaning changing. So Gemini is a mutable air sign, which means that Gemini is adaptable, it's changeable. And in fact, Gemini's strength is in its ability to take in new information and connect the dots. So the question about this new moon is, what new facts have altered your thinking? And how can you use those new facts that maybe weren't facts for you 6 months ago? How can you use those to plant ideas that actually are the seeds for intentions that can grow? But here's the important thing about Gemini energy, and that is that Gemini is one of those signs that makes it up as it goes along. And so you need to begin without actually knowing what you'd ideally like to know before you began, especially for you fixed signs out there, for you Tauruses, Leos, Scorpios, and Aquarians. It's sometimes difficult to engage that Gemini energy because you don't want to start anything unless you have a plan and you know what you're doing. So, so this is just where this new moon occurs for everyone. Now, the other thing about this new moon is that it's not just a new moon in Gemini. It's a new moon in Gemini with Mercury, Venus, and the North Node all in Gemini. This is convincing, serious energy. Serious may be the wrong word, because although Gemini can be serious, it's seriously curious. It's seriously restless. It's seriously whimsical and seriously lighthearted, as oxymoronic as that sounds. But the fact is that the North Node of the moon has just retrograded, and the nodes of the moon move in retrograde motion. So the North Node of the moon is now in Gemini for the next 1.5 years. Mercury is in Gemini just for a few weeks. Venus is in Gemini. Normally, Venus moves through a sign in just a few weeks, but because of its retrograde motion, Venus right now is in Gemini for 4 months. And so Venus is holding a position when a planet is retrograde. Remember, the astrology axiom that is almost always true is that the slower moving planet always trumps the faster moving planet. Now, this makes Pluto a heavier energy than Mercury. However, Venus right now is moving so slowly that even though she is still Venus, she is way more serious than ever, way more heavy, more needs to be contended with. And the fact that during this new moon, Venus retrograde is actually lined up, is conjoined, is conjunct Mercury. And so Venus and Mercury, it's like the new moon isn't the only conjunction in this chart. We also have Venus and Mercury conjunct. But the energy is moving fast. And this is a bit like a whimsical spring breeze, that can blow your hat off, because one moment it moves one way, you tilt your hat to adjust for it, and then the wind stops, you take your hand off your hat, and a second later it's blowing gusting hard the other way. And so we have to be ready, like a kite, to be able to, or flying a kite, to adapt to the changing circumstances, the changing information. If you think you know the truth and you're going to hold on to it, those changing winds will surely crash you. Instead, doesn't mean accept everything. It just means entertain every new breeze that comes along. Now, this new moon, though, has its own serious piece to it, because it having just, the sun having just moved into Gemini a couple days ago, and the moon just having moved into Gemini just a few hours ago, the new moon is occurring at 2 degrees of Gemini. Saturn is at 1 degree of Aquarius, 51 minutes. What this means is that that this new moon is within a quarter of a degree of being exactly trine or harmonized with stabilizing Sirius karmic heavyweight Saturn, the planet that that karmically makes things happen that we deserve, both good and bad. Saturn often gets a bad rap. I don't want to slip into a Saturn talk or lecture, because I've certainly done enough of those recently. But I just want to say the fact that this new moon is forming such an easy and smooth trine to Saturn, it steadies this flightiness, this almost ungrounded part of Gemini, and it makes this a much more karmic or serious lunation than it might otherwise be. The fact of the matter is that what we're thinking now, and when I say now, I mean several hours ago during the new moon, now meaning 8:17 p.m. New York time on Friday, May 22nd. I mean now, all day today, this entire weekend, and for that matter, for the next week or so. What we are thinking now is co-creating, is setting the intentions for the future, for our future, whether we're conscious of that or not. So this is the magic of astrology. It's, you want to be conscious of things that you weren't previously aware of. Now, the other piece is that the Mercury-Venus conjunction, retrograde Venus, is intensifying our desire for curiosity. It's intensifying our curiosity. It's intensifying it. Why? Because it's stationary retrograde. Okay, it's been retrograde a week, but it's barely moved 1 degree in that entire week. It's, for all practical purposes, Venus is holding this position, and Mercury is whizzing into that Venus and through it. And so we have this scattered, multiplicity-oriented, variety-oriented Gemini energy, and our Venus, or Venus at this new moon lined up with Mercury, is not only reflecting our attraction to more information, but it's also square to Neptune. And this is something that, for those of you who listened to my May forecast, it's still available on YouTube. You know that Venus was squaring Neptune at the beginning of May, and now retrograde, it's squaring it again. And as it turns direct, and next month, late next month, it will square that Neptune a third and final time. And this is not only about our love of different information, that with Mercury there, we now want to talk about it, but it's also the fact that none of it's true. And when I say none of it's true, it's Neptune is nebulous. It takes facts and it fuzzes them out. It makes it difficult to know what is real. That's the downside. The upside is that imagination is as real as reality. And of course, imagination is the scaffolding upon which Saturn builds reality later on. So we have the power at this new moon to employ our fantasies and imagination that may just disappear, like off into space if they're irrelevant, but they also can be the the fundamentals for what it is that we manifest as time goes on, if we use this square consciously. one last thing I want to say, and this is something that you probably haven't seen anywhere else. I happen to be a total quintile nerd or geek, and quintile, normally we use aspects that divide into 12, so that an opposition divides 2 into 12. A square is like 1/4 of a circle, 1/4, it divides 4 into 12. A trine is 1/3 of a circle, it divides 3 into 12. Well, there are not 12 signs up there. I hate to discourage anyone who thinks there are. There are 12 signs in here. Our mind has made up the 12 signs. And the division of the circle by 5 is incredibly magical. We talked about this in last week's talk about Venus, because Venus goes retrograde it goes retrograde 5 times every 8 years, making a large 5-pointed star in the sky. And now at this new moon, Venus, retrograde Venus, making one of these star points in the sky, lining up with intellectual, cerebral, even clever. Mercury in Gemini is clever, clever, clever. It can make up anything about anything. Mercury and Venus together are 1/5 of a circle, or quintile, to Chiron. And Chiron is 1/5 of a circle to Pluto, which means that these 3 points, made up by 4 planets, are forming a quintile triangle, which is basically 3 points on a 5-pointed star. The other points would be here somewhere off in Scorpio land, and somewhere here, probably either at the very end of Leo or beginning of Virgo. Actually, it would be at the beginning of Virgo, 2 degrees of Virgo. So the point here is that even when we think we know what's going on, there's always more going on. And our words right now, words being Mercury, have the power of healing. That would be Chiron. If we are kind and compassionate, and remain open and curious, that would be Venus in Gemini, and can actually have deep and powerful transformative qualities, and that would be Pluto, this whole thing making a cosmic 5-pointed star. So I'm going to unshare my screen, and I think we are back. Are we back? There, I see you.
Yes, we are.
So those are my little slides that I wanted to share. And I think the bottom line on all of this is that I think of Tom Robbins, who in the closing lines of his wonderful book, Still Life with Woodpecker, the closing lines of the book are, "It's never too late to have a happy childhood. And it's never too late to do a new moon ritual." It's not, because it happens in our mind. You know, we can either maroon the past to the past, or through the magic of our frontal, our cerebral cortex, we can bring the present alive in the present moment and manifest it as if it were. And it takes very little energy to drive a resonant circuit. So if we tune into that, we're going to tune into it whenever we do.
All right. So Rick, some things that I took away from what you just shared about this new moon is that, number one, what we're thinking now is co-creating and setting intentions for our future. I mean, that's probably always true, right?
Every new moon, it's more true. And every conjunction, even the Saturn Pluto, which we're still in, all of those are true. But yes, true.
Okay. That our words right now have the power to have a transformational healing power if we remain open and curious and kind and compassionate.
True.
Okay. All right. And this, I've been playing a lot with this because of the Gemini invitation for genuine curiosity and what's required from us in order to be in that true place of genuine curiosity. What I'm finding, especially in this very polarized environment that we're in right now, is that humility is very necessary in order to have a stance of genuine curiosity. And then also this word that you said, kindness. and a true desire to understand the other human being. And again, like you said, you don't necessarily have to agree, but there is so much healing for people in just being heard, and even given the opportunity to share why they think what they think. And I think that that's really important for all of us right now. And then
The Dalai Lama has said, when asked, so what is your religion? What is your practice? He has responded, my religion is kindness. And of course, he's also said, when possible, be compassionate. It's always possible.
Okay, so the other thing that you said is there's more going on than we're aware of. And so this is another reminder. I mean, I think you've been reminding us about this for weeks, to not become too staunchly, too rigid in our viewpoint about what's going on, and to understand that there is more going on than we know.
Well,
and
that's
that
the difference between humility and hubris, in a way. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that more will be revealed in time. And so the more staunchly attached we are to a viewpoint, the less open we are to additional data that will help us continue to refine our perspective of what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's, in that, and this is what I feel and believe right now based on the data that I'm aware of. It's like, and if you approach any conversation with that, it's so non-threatening, because there is a acknowledgement that A, there's probably things you don't know, and B, there's more to know. So go ahead.
I have a friend who used to sign his emails, just another data point.
Exactly. Just, that's been the thing I've read.
You don't have to believe me. I don't even know that I believe me.
Right.
It's just another data point.
Perfect. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's totally Gemini. You see, Gemini, okay, here, a quick thing. So, Mercury appears in two different manifestations. It appears as a morning star and an evening star. Mercury, as a morning star, is Gemini. And Gemini just wants to connect the dots. I might have said this here before. I've said it often. Geminis are information sluts. They have no value judgment. There's no discrimination. If it's data, it's okay, I'm in. Give me more information.
Information sluts.
Yeah, okay.
Oh my God,
now, the opposite form of Mercury, that's the opposite of being an information slut, is the evening star Mercury, which is Virgo. And Virgo doesn't want the noise of Gemini. Virgo wants only the information that's valuable, useful, true. All the rest, it's just like, send it away. Okay. So here's the thing, and what you said made me think of this. And this works. I've been playing with this image for more than a decade. Mercury in Gemini, or Gemini, is AM radio, and Virgo is FM radio. And it works like this. AM radio, which is amplitude modulation, is sloppy, it's noisy, it's staticky, it's talk radio, it's listen to a song and then tune to another station. It's low attention span, but high engagement in the moment. And it's not very good sound quality. And then, and people typically, when they listen to AM radio, they tune. What station can I get? What's on this station? FM is a total different experience. People have their FM station, and it's like that critical laser Virgo in energy that is frequency modulation instead of amplitude. It's not loud. It has to do with a more subtle frequency. So you can pack a huge amount of information into a very narrow slice of waveform, which gives us the ability to get high quality stereo in a station that's 93.1 or 88 or 0.6. I think they're all odd numbers, actually, oddly enough. Whereas the AM dial is, 1020 or 780. And so this difference between the Gemini, which, like you said, it's just another data point, but what that allows us to do, what it requires us to do is it requires us to see the world as a spectrum of frequency vibrations that gives us the ability then to tune it.
Mm.
And where we tune it, the station that we are listening to is not the only station out there. In fact, it's not reality. It's just what we're tuned to.
Hmm. Yes, and that is so apparent right now where we're at. Just the different realities people are experiencing based on the data or the information that they're taking in. It's creating their entire experience of what's happening. And so in that, there is compassion though, because you know that where the person is just based on all the data and whatever frequency that they're dialed into right now. So Angela asks, Rick, do you feel that new moon energy represents things you can't immediately see and yet still exist?
That's a really good point. Yeah, the short answer is yes. And of course, I always have a long answer. All conjunctions are invisible. Why? When we can see a full moon, when something is as far away from the sun as it can get, it reflects the light fully. And so it's hard to miss a full moon. Has anyone ever seen a new moon? No. You can see a new moon maybe 20, 30 hours after it occurs, when it's the little sliver just reappearing in the evening sky when that sun goes down and the brand new magical new moon is there. I know astronomers have techniques in which they can use telescopes that can see a new moon, but the new moon, if it's not on the same, if it's not exactly on the ecliptic, which it normally isn't, which is going to bring up another point here that maybe we'll dig into more next week. But if the new moon, in normal cases, the new moon is in the sky at the same time as the sun, if the sun is above the horizon, and you can't see it because you're blinded by the light of the sun. It takes time for that energy to differentiate so that we actually get perception of it. So all conjunctions are inherently invisible. If you have a conjunction in your own chart, whatever the planetary pair is, it's hard for you to see one planet from the other, because to you they appear as a single point. Now one can develop contemplative, meditative techniques to begin to discriminate and differentiate those two energies. But normally new moons, how the moon is going to manifest is invisible, which is why it's so ripe at a conjunction, because it's almost like a karmic free zone where we can imagine anything. And if we imagine it, then it has the potential or the possibility of occurring.
Okay, the last summary piece of this talk is do a new moon ritual. It's not too late. You can do one now. Rick, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, yes, we have the moon cycle, but then, we have Mercury has a cycle and Venus has a cycle and Saturn has a cycle, and all of the cycles we can work with really consciously. I remember just having my mind blown when I finally realized that I think it was Adam Summer was teaching about the Mercury cycle and how each cycle has a different flavor or energy that you can work with, and you can work with them consciously to do the same thing we do at the new moon, which is to set intentions, to get clear on what we would like to manifest. So the lunar cycle has that capability. Mercury has that capability. Venus has the capability. Mars has that capability. And when we understand the flavor of each of those, we can actually work very consciously and intentionally with them. So someday maybe we can go down those rabbit holes. We do have mastery classes on those different things like Venus cycle and Mercury cycle. But I think that it's just, there's layers upon layers when we're studying astrology. There's always deeper to go, but all of it is bringing us into deeper connection and awareness with ourselves and with all that is. So it's an amazing and beautiful process. And I love that we started here today with the new moon conjunction.
So I would like to share a short William Blake poem with you that came to my mind as we were talking, because it has to do with this whole, the difference between the Taurian, and I'm not saying all Tauruses are closed-minded. That's absolutely, totally not true. I mean, after all, it was Sigmund Freud who was open-minded enough to bring us all forms of depth psychology, just as an example that popped into my mind. And by the same token, not all Geminis are necessarily curious and open-minded. Donald Trump is certainly a Gemini. But with this emphasis of this Gemini energy and its trine to the Saturn, the make it real, and yet it's squared to Neptune, the dreams and imagination, and then we bring in these quintiles, which always have to do with the creative process of metaphysical into physical. I mean, it's an artistic, musical, poetic. William Blake, who I'm going to read this poem by, had a very, very strong quintile chart. And the poem goes like, no, before I say the poem, I just need to say Isaac Newton was one of Blake's anti-heroes. He was like the archetype of the villain, because Newton was built upon measuring, and it only exists if it's real, and science, and the whole idea of, there's a very famous Blake engraving called Newton, in which this person is sitting by the seashore with a compass and a straight edge, which represents the logic of science. And behind him, everything is beautiful and colorful, and in front of him, everything is just dead gray. Very famous engraving. And the only reason why I mentioned that is he conjures up Newton's name in this short poem. And it goes like this. And the name of the poem is You Don't Believe. You don't believe, I won't attempt to make you. You are asleep, I won't attempt to wake you. Sleep on while in your pleasant dreams of reason, you may dream of life's clear streams. Reason and Newton, they are quite two things, for so the swallow and the sparrow sings. Reason says miracle, Newton says doubt. Aye, that's the way to make all nature out. Doubt, and don't believe without experiment. That is the very thing that Jesus meant when he said, only believe. Believe and try, and never mind the reason why.
Perfect. Believe and try. I love it. Rick, thank you so much for being here with us for another week of the Cosmic Connection. Thank you to all of you for tuning in and for continuing to give us your feedback on this segment. It is so much fun for me to do. And so the fact that you all love it is like, yay, we get to keep doing it. Awesome. So again, thank you. And I hope you have a beautiful new moon and lots of ideas and things that we can infuse into this new moon with all of this guidance that you've given us today here, Rick. Thank you so much.
And may your best thoughts consciously manifest.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see. Oh, remember, next week it's going to be Thursday. So we're changing officially to Thursdays. We don't know what time yet. Go to astrologyhub.com/podcast for the latest updates and the weekly digest with all of the content that we're putting out every week. Take care, everybody, and have a great weekend.